Welcome to the Army and Battle section of my Tomb King's guide. In this section, I will go over the entire Tomb King's roster, every unit's pros and cons, ideal compositions, and how to best use the roster to ensure you're getting the full advantage. Disclaimer, this guide is based on my personal experience and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the game Immortal Empires. If you have a different strategy or want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. Now that's out of the way, let's get into the video. This video brought to you by NordVPN. Stay tuned for a very special offer. The Tomb King roster is quite like the Tomb King campaign in the fact that the early game is quite weak, but once you manage to get to the end game, then that's really where the fun begins. The majority of the early game units are total chod, with just a few standing out as being even halfway decent, but once you get past that and get to the end game, then you're really spoilt for choice with all the amazing constructs. Speaking of, the constructs are the best units in the roster, without a shadow of a doubt, and will make up the majority of your armies once you're able to field them all. The other categories do suffer because of this. The Cav and Chariot units are pretty dire, and you only have one option of ranged infantry, which loses all effectiveness once you pass turn 20. The artillery is fortunately quite decent despite its reduced size, with both of the units being pretty great and in theory being usable right into the endgame if you wanted. The way you recruit units does restrict you from getting any consistent comps unless you have an ungodly number of fully upgraded settlements, but fortunately you have so many great choices of units in the endgame that even if you can't follow my comps exactly, you should still have something that can tear up the battlefield. Finally, as I mentioned in the campaign section, the Realm of Souls provides you with some bonuses if you end up taking a lot of casualties, so even if it's not going all your way, there may still be hope thanks to regen and Ushabti. Now, onto the units. Starting us off are these skeleton warriors, and oh boy do these guys ever suck. They're a shielded meat shield and do basically no damage if they go against anything but zombies and must rely totally on other units to do all the damage for them. I suppose that is the point, but it's still quite annoying to have to slog through the first bunch of battles with nothing between the enemy and your units but a bunch of dusty bone boys who will hardly slow them down. That being said, you can recruit as many of them as you want, and since recruitment and upkeep is free for the Tomb Kings, it's a pretty common occurrence to fill all your armies with these guys before swapping them out for something more elite once you can. They technically come in two varieties, swords and spears. Skeleton spearmen are technically a different unit, but they're basically the same with some milder than mild anti-large damage and a charge defense against large, but they will perform essentially the same. They are still just there to hold the line while other units do all the damage, so it really doesn't matter if you target enemy large units or not, as long as they're blocking access to your damage dealers. Nehekara warriors are up next, and they're decent enough improvement over regular skeleton warriors, with some okay damage and anti-infantry bonus. It's worth replacing any skeleton warriors you can with these guys, but since they're limited in recruitment, it's best not to do the full army spam just to make up the numbers. In combat they can do some decent damage against some light melee units, but they will still need to rely on other units to do the majority of damage for them, so don't leave them to their own devices for too long. Since they lose shields, they're a bit more vulnerable to ranged fire, but the increased armour from regular skeleton warriors kinda balances it out. They also lack any form of AP damage, so once they get going against super tough infantry, they'll become pretty useless and will need hefty support to even survive the battle. Tomb Guard are our next unit, and they're the elite melee infantry of the Tomb Kings. They're armoured and shielded and are anti-infantry fighters, so specialise at taking on hordes of the enemy chaff that they might send. I choose to replace all my Nehekara warriors with these guys as soon as I could, since they just outclass them in basically every way and will generally be sticking around till the endgame. They excel in frontline holding and can even do some pretty good damage themselves as long as they aren't going against anything with too much armour, since they still lack any form of good AP damage. Because of this, they will still need more elite units to help them with most endgame units, which is a little disappointing, but I suppose they can't be too strong or they wouldn't be balanced. Also, I noticed that for some reason, even though they're anti-infantry units, they don't actually have any anti-infantry damage. I don't know if this is just me, but it's pretty weird. They do come in two varieties, swords and halberds. Halberds are pretty much the same but have anti-large and charge defense versus large as well as AP damage. They're honestly better than regular Tomb Guard at taking on both large and regular unit sizes. So if you manage to spam enough buildings, it's actually worth having your front lines entirely consistent of these guys, since they'll do more and take less damage. They will hold your lines well and do good damage versus basically anything since they have AP and anti-large damage, but as usual, since the Tomb King roster is reliant on constructs, it'll still be wise to give them some support. For our first and last ranged infantry unit, we have the skeleton archers, and they're pretty underwhelming, let me tell you. The only thing they have going for them is their good range, since the damage they throw out is pretty pitiful and means you'll need to focus fire all your units to even touch anything that isn't recruitable from turn 1. They fortunately do fire in an arc, so are decent at firing over your unit's heads, but as always, it's still advisable to get an angle or a flank on the enemy to maximise damage and minimise friendly fire. It's also worth deploying them ahead of your melee units before moving them back to ensure you're getting off as many shots as possible before melee begins. I was taking about 4 to 6 of these guys with me in my armies from the early game right up until I could replace them in the end game, but they really aren't essential. Onto the cav now, and oh boy do I have some gripes about these units. First off we have Skeleton Horsemen, and boy oh boy were they ever useless for me. They're shielded, very fast, and have Vanguard deployment, and still manage to be one of the easiest units to die in the roster. The only good use I could find for these guys was scouting and maybe some very light melee combat with ranged units if you could get 2 units to take on 1, but they still have half a chance of being annihilated by basically anything. Even if you pick units that the game deems low threat, they still need copious amounts of support to even get out there alive, and even then, they'll still barely get a kill at all. The one thing they're okay at is chasing down retreating units, and that's only because they can't fight back, but if I were you, I just wouldn't bother. They come in 2 varieties, swords and archers. Archers are basically the same thing, but with bows and some minor stat differences. The ranged aspect makes them actually okay at skirmishing some very weak enemies, but they're still pretty weak, so don't send them against anything with too much armor or they're just wasting their shots. They also have similar survivability in melee, so if they get caught out by basically anything, you can kiss them goodbye because they have basically 0 chance of winning. I'd say a couple of archers are okay for an early game army to do some harassment, but only take regular horsemen if you have the space in your armies and only use them for scouting and chasing retreating units, otherwise they're pretty trash. Nehekara horsemen are next up and they're marginally more okay, but I'm still not in love with them. They're still shielded, but this time they're anti-infantry, so do some actual damage rather than just waving foam swords at the enemy units. It's very worth replacing any skeleton horsemen with these guys as soon as you can, since the difference in battle is really night and day. They can actually go against some very light ranged units by themselves and survive, which is just a miracle, and they're of course brilliant for charging down retreating units. They don't really have any charge bonus since they are sword units, so hammer and anvil will be pointless and just tire them out rather than increasing their damage. It's better to leave them fighting with some support, and as long as they aren't overwhelmed or going against something super tough, they should do just fine.
So what I think is, oh, it's another sponsor spot. How about that? You heard of NordVPN? I don't know if you have. I mean, not many people have been sponsored by them. Only every single YouTuber that you can think of. If you haven't heard of them, this VPN service has like 5,500 servers in 60 different countries around the world. What VPN is, it basically allows you to connect to a virtual network and just say you are anywhere in the world. This allows you to do many things, such as keeping your data safe, watching Netflix from different countries, pretending that you're in a different country to keep the FBI off your trail. I mean, the list literally does go on. The thing that makes Nord special is they have no data logging, they have 24/7 customer support, and you can have up to 6 devices connected at once, and it just takes one single tap on mobile. They also have a cybersecurity suite that acts as an ad blocker, so if you're tired of all those nasty pop-up websites, you just flick on Nord and don't have to worry about it. On top of all that, there is a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can use this for 29 days, and if you decide, you know what, this isn't really for me, you can cancel it, and they'll give you your money back, no questions asked. It's got limited bandwidth, so you never have to worry about running out of data. It's compatible with many different OSs in the world. You've got Mac, you've got Windows, you've got Linux, Android, anything you can think of, Nord pretty much supports it. There's even an extension for Chrome that makes it that much easier just to knock it on when you try to do something. It's also ridiculously easy and fast to set up, so we're just going to go on a quick connect here, as you can see. Tap that. It's going to quickly connect me to the quickest server. There it is. It's that fast. If you wonder how fast these data servers actually are, like the download speeds and the upload speeds, we're just going to run a quick little speed test here, and we'll quickly find out. We'll go down. That is pretty speedy. So if you'd like to get yourself some NordVPN, click the link in the description to get this exclusive deal you won't get anywhere else. 70% off a 3-year plan and 1 3-month. That comes out to about $349 per month, which is ridiculously cheap considering how secure it is, how fast it is, how many devices you can have it on. It's just ridiculously cheaper than all the other options out there. Once again, thank you for Nord for sponsoring this video, and now back to your guide.
Moving on to the Chariots now, and unfortunately it's a similar story to Cav. The Skeleton Chariot is an anti-infantry unit, and in theory is great for tearing up the enemy backlines with a bunch of charging and sustained melee. What they actually do is say a unit is low threat, get sent against said unit, die almost immediately, and then increase your sodium concentration significantly.
Just so you know, this 58 speed is outrunning my 74 speed. They ain't got poison damage or anything like that. They ain't even got anti-large damage. And they beat! Oh my god, Skeleton Chariots are completely useless. They are completely useless.
Oh, it's a green, boss. We can definitely take that out. Boss, I'm afraid we got completely fricked over by that unit. Nothing we could have done. No, that unit we said was going to be no problem. Yeah, completely killed us. Nothing we can do.
The only units they seemed to do okay against were very weak ranged units, and they had to be one-on-one with no other enemy units getting even close, or they'd just break and disappear. One thing they do have going for them is better charge bonus than regular Horsemen, so if you are really careful and love micro, you could use them for hammer and anvil, but personally I try to get rid of these guys as soon as I can. They come in two varieties, regular and archers. Archer chariots have literally the exact same stats but with some ranged ability tacked on. They actually have pretty decent range damage, so if you stick them on skirmish mode and keep them on the move, they can actually do some good damage and even pick up some kills if you're really lucky. Since they have the exact same melee stats as regular chariots, then you can still use them for the same exceptionally light melee fighting and just take these guys rather than the archerless variant, but honestly neither are outstanding, so I wouldn't blame you if you gave them a miss. Next up we have the only monster unit, the Carrion. Don't use it! Next we have the Ushapti, and fine, I'll come back and do the Carrion for real. It's a flying unit, so it's super fast and it starts with Vanguard deployment, and it's really not very good at all. The only thing it has going for it is great speed, so it can chase down retreating units pretty good, but since it's flying, it really struggles to do any damage to them and simply keeps them running rather than doing anything else useful. It's also not so bad at pinning down enemy units, but you need to make sure you get your high damage units in as soon as possible, or all you'll end up doing is feeding the enemy kills and wasting an army slot. If you really have no other options to fill this role, then go for it, but otherwise I really can't recommend them. Now we come to the real meat of the Tomb King roster. Kicking off the constructs are the Ushapti, and already things are getting exciting. They're armoured and deal armour-piercing anti-infantry damage and are amazing at helping your front lines tear through enemy infantry. I find it's best to keep them hidden behind your melee troops up until the lines clash. Then you can send them in from behind your own units to make sure they don't get surrounded and they just clean up. Keeping them embedded in your melee lines like this helps reduce the amount of damage they take since they're surrounded by other things for the enemy to hit, but it also allows them to do amazing damage since they can just push your units out of the way to hit the enemy. They also have pretty good speed, so if you were sure that you won't get surrounded, you could send them around to get a flank and surround the enemy units and break them even faster. They come in two varieties, regular and great bows. Great bows are granted armour-piercing missiles which do crazy amounts of damage over a fantastic range. Unfortunately, since the unit size is so small, the firing rate isn't amazing, so they're more suited to taking out fewer elite units than a lot of weak units, but they can still do some serious work no matter what you send them up against. They also have similar melee stats to regular Ushapti, so can handle some light melee combat if they get caught or run out of ammo. Next up we have Tomb Scorpions. These absolute Chad units will rip and tear the enemy infantry like very few units in the game can, and watching them fight is half the fun of the Tomb Kings. They're armoured, deal armour-piercing, anti-infantry damage, and cause terror because of course they do. They are amazing in clumps of enemy infantry, and even when surrounded can do huge amounts of damage without hardly breaking a sweat. They have amazing survivability due to their great armour and large attack animations, making it hard for enemies to see, let alone hit them. Unfortunately, these large attack animations do sometimes cause them to get out of position or to hit your own units, but is a small price to pay for the value they bring to your armies. I take two of them as soon as I can, and you could easily bring them into the endgame with you, but sadly there are that many other great choices that they didn't make it to my ideal comp. Sepulchral Stalkers are next up, and again we have a fantastic unit. They deal armour-piercing anti-large damage and have Vanguard deployment and Stalk, so are very unlike any other units in their fact that they're sneaky giant killers. They're amazing at getting a flank on enemy units and pulling them to pieces with their devastating ranged attacks, and if they can get an angle and hold it, then whatever they're shooting at doesn't stand a chance. Unfortunately, they do have very slow firing speed, so if the enemy does decide to advance on them, then they won't be able to get off many shots before they need to retreat. Their shots also do magical damage, so have no problem getting through resistances. The anti-large damage, however, is only in melee, so once they run out of ammo, don't be scared to send them into a duel with some mid-tier cav, as they can be really effective as long as you pick your targets. I choose to replace my ranged cav with these guys and keep two of them around until the end, because that range damage is just too good to miss. Necropolis Knights are very similar to Stalkers, but where Stalkers are more into stalking, Necropolis Knights are more into head-on charging. They're armoured and shielded and deal armour-piercing poison attacks, so are experts at charging around to catch out the enemy ranged units before tearing them to pieces. They outclass any cav or chariot on the roster and do amazing damage, and the poison is just the cherry on top, as it makes whatever they're attacking that much easier to kill. They're also incredibly tough with massive armor stat plus shields, making them nigh impossible to take out. They're also fairly quick, but they can be caught out by cav, so you do need to keep an eye on them to make sure they don't get too far out of position and away from help. To top it all off, they also have pretty decent charge bonus, so can do some mean hammer and anvil or sustained melee, so it's not really a bad way to use them. They also come in two varieties, regular and halberds. Taking halberds makes them drop the shields but gain anti-large attacks. There are also some minor stat differences, but the anti-large damage does make them great cav duelists, so it's kinda dependent on what you're going up against. I'd say a mix of these guys with you is the safest bet, so you have options no matter what the enemy brings. The Bone Giant is next up, and it gives me a giant bone. These absolute units are armoured, have armour-piercing missiles, and can cause terror. They have insane range and the damage they do is incredible, but they do fire quite slowly, so it's better to aim for single entity targets rather than spreading the damage around an entire unit of infantry or something else weaker. They also fire magical ammo, so any resistances will be ignored, and the massive missile damage will go straight into draining enemy HP. They're also pretty decent in melee, but will struggle if they get surrounded by anything elite or anti-large, so just keep an eye on them and send support if you can. Of course, since he's such a large target, he's also pretty easy to take out from ranged fire, so keep an eye on any enemies focusing down and try to avoid the damage or take them out as soon as you can. I take one of these guys as soon as I can and keep him all the way till the end if I can. Next up we have the Khemrian War Sphinx. They're armoured and deal armour piercing and anti-infantry damage as well as causing terror. They fit pretty much into the same role as Tomb Scorpions, but are a little taller with some ranged units sat on their backs for a little more passive damage. They are amazing at getting into the middle of enemy units and causing some serious damage, but at the same time it's important not to let them get too surrounded, especially by anything too elite, or they'll quickly lose all their health. Something I forgot to mention until now is that necrotechs are amazing with all the constructs and are a must-have for all your armies once you start to take a lot of them, but I'll talk more about that in the Lords and Hero video. As for these guys, I take 1 or 2 of them if I can, as they're just amazing in the thick of melee versus basically anything, and as much as it pains me to say, I do replace my Tomb Scorpions with these guys as soon as I can, since they're just better and more versatile. The Hero Titan is a unique one. It's armoured, deals armour piercing damage, and causes terror, which is pretty standard. What isn't standard is the fact that they can cast several spells. They can use Spirit Leech and Shem's Burning Gauge, as well as increasing the Winds of Magic reserves, so unlike any other unit we've seen so far. On top of that, they're also amazing in combat with magical and fire attacks, meaning they can go toe to toe with almost anything and come out on top. They also have great armour, so can stick around for a very long time as long as they don't get too separated and surrounded by anything super elite or anti-large. On top of all that, they're also just really cool to watch in action, and at the end of the day, style points are almost as important as the efficacy of the unit. I take one of these guys with me, and they stay right until the end because, as I said before, there really is nothing else like them. Our final construct is the Necrosphinx, and once more, it's pretty top tier. It's armoured, deals armour piercing, anti-large damage, and causes terror. It's quite a unique unit in the sense that it's a massive unit that specialises in taking out other large units. Nevertheless, it's amazing in combat, and can take enemy large units to pieces, and can even duel with other massive units and hold its own pretty well, even if it sometimes needs some support. If you manage to get them into a lump of cav, then it's over for them, as the massive attack animations and huge damage will tear them to pieces in moments. Of course, they're large themselves and can be caught out by anti-large units, and as with all massive units, they're also very vulnerable to being a ranged focus, but that's nothing that a little micro can't prevent. If there's no large units for them to go up against, then don't be afraid to send them against clumps of infantry, as they still do amazing even without the anti-large bonus. I take a couple of these guys as soon as I can, and they're staying with me until the endgame because there's really nothing else like them. Finally, we come to my favourite category, and once again it's looking a little barren, but not to worry. Both the units are actually pretty fab. First up we have the Screaming Skull Catapult, which fires armour-piercing anti-infantry missiles which can do huge damage to approaching enemies no matter what stage in the game you use them in. It's of course best kept at the back, as its massive range will ensure you can fire over friendly heads and get plenty of shots off before your melee troops even see the enemy. As with most artillery, it's best to focus on the major threats before they reach you, and once the lines have clashed, it's a good idea to manually aim at the back of the enemy clumps to make sure you're avoiding friendly fire as much as possible. I took 2 of these guys, and I only replaced them with the very next unit. The Casket of Souls is our final unit, and it's only unlockable through a rite. It's armoured and has armour-piercing missiles called the Light of Death, which are basically the souls of the dead being loosely fired in the general direction of the enemy. These missiles also deal magical damage, meaning even if the enemy has resistances, they're still going to feel the full power of the attack. Unfortunately, the poor accuracy makes these guys pretty bad at hitting single targets, so it's best to wait until the enemy is clumped up and then fire, because even if you miss, chances are you're still going to hit. To top things off, it also has a passive ability that increases magic reserves, which is never something to complain about. I take 2 of these guys and replace my Screaming Skulls as soon as I can, as even with the worst accuracy, the damage is just top tier and I can't miss out. Now we come to the Regiments of Renown. I'll call out each unit, what they're a unit of, and the differences they have to regular units of the same rank. King Nikesh's Scorpion Legion are a skeleton spearman unit and gain poison attacks, 35 armour, and expert charge defense. The Kepra Guard are a Tomb Guard unit and lose their shields and 8 melee attack but gain 7 charge bonus, magical anti-infantry attacks, and regeneration. Blessed Legion of Fakath are skeleton archers, gain 20 range, 20 armour, 1 missile damage, and armour sundering missiles. The Chosen of the Gods are a Ushabti Great Bow unit and lose 51 missile damage but gain explosive range shots and the shield breaker effect on their missiles. Eyes of the Desert are a Sepulchral Stalkers unit and gain 10 missile damage, poison missile attacks, and 25% missile resistance. The Sphinx of Thor is a Necrosphinx and gains 820 health, magical and fire attacks, and 25% fire resistance. The following are only accessible through the Mortuary Cult. Uzirian's Legion of the Underworld are a Nehekara Warriors unit and gain Ethereal, 70% physical resist, speed, melee attack and defense, weapon strength, magical and anti-infantry damage, and lose health, all armor, and some leadership. Storm Riders of Khazar are a Nehekara Horseman unit and gain increases to basically everything except weapon strength. The Flock of Jaff are a Karen unit and gain magical and fire attacks as well as armor piercing damage, increases to nearly everything except speed, and a decrease to melee defense and a death from above ability. Finally, the Venom Knights of Asaph are a Necropolis Knights unit and gain increases to everything except armor and weapon strength. Now we come to my ideal balance comp for the endgame. Worth noting is that getting the same comp for all your armies as the Tomb Kings is nigh impossible because of how recruitment works, so just do your best with what you have to fill all of the key roles. I take 4 Tomb King Halberds as my front line, and you may notice I'm down from 6 to 4 melee units. That's simply because the Tomb Kings have so many goddamn good constructs that I just had to make an exception. I take 4 Ushabti Bows as my ranged units that will deploy ahead of the melee lines. I take 2 Sepulchral Stalkers and deploy them in a good flanking position using the Vanguard if I can to get a drop on enemies. I take 2 Kemrian War Sphinxes and deploy them just behind the melee lines on the flanks. 1 Hyro Titan who goes behind the melee troops in the middle, 2 Necrosphinxes who go just outside the War Sphinxes, 2 Casket of Souls and a Bone Giant in alternating order to go on my very back line, making sure they have clear sight lines to approaching enemies. Finally, I have my Lords in the best mounts they can and the Necrotect also mounted. To see how this performs in battle, I'll pass you over to live commentary, Miles. Take it away.
Thanks for that, Miles. Okay, we are here at the Black Pyramid of Nagash, I believe. Is the Black Pyramid of Nagash? Well, it's the Black Pyramid, either way. It's a cool upside down one, the one where we have the final fight as the Tomb Kings, which is a super fun battle, highly recommend it. And here we are, I've got my composition. Have my Sepulchral Stalkers starting off over here. I'm just going to move my units straight up. I could try and move them behind these buildings to try and avoid their fire, but honestly, I'd kind of rather just tank it out and get up and get into the fight as soon as possible. The Tomb Kings overall, they are very reliant on their monsters, and the things that can shoot us from here, I mean, they've got a couple of Luminarchs, but they need a pretty clear shot and they fire pretty slow anyway. And then these Hellstorm rocket barriers, they're of course going to get a few shots off, but because we have a lot of large units, we should be just fine. Move my Sepulchral Stalkers up here, trying to get a sort of double pattern on, so going to try and shoot these guys from here and then shoot them from here when they move up. We'll see how that fares shortly. The enemies launched a couple of Hellstorm rocket battery volleys at me, took out a couple of Tomb Guard Halberd units, and done a little bit of damage to my Ushabti, but no worries there. Just going to speed this up. As you can see, just getting peppered on the approach by the Empire, very classic. There we are, the 2 Casket of Souls and the Bone Giant about to get into range 2. Sending the Casket of Souls into these clumps, trying to hit some of those great swords. There's a nice little clump here, so I'm definitely going to aim for that. The Bone Giant, he's just getting into range now, and he's going to be focusing on taking out one of those Luminarchs of Hysh, because goddamn it, those things do a lot of damage, especially to single entities such as himself. Now the Sepulchral Stalkers over here, they kind of missed out just a little bit because the Demogryph Knights, they kind of went around and avoided their attacks, but not to worry, we can move them around the back or send them into the artillery there. As you can see, the 2 War Sphinxes and the Necrosphinxes are moving up, along with the Ushabti and the Lord and the Necrotect. The Hero Titan, he's moving his way up quite slowly, along with these Tomb Guard. Their Lord, which is the General of the Empire, is kind of coming around here, is going to charge into these Ushabti. So I'm definitely wanting to keep an eye on that, not moving my Lord too far away so that he can get in and win that duel, because Cetra on that Chariot of the Gods, goddamn it, that man is good. Now send in my Necrosphinx against their Demogryph Knights. Unfortunately, these ones are halberds, these ones are not. The halberd ones, they are going to cause us some serious trouble. Just going to slow it down here, because they have that anti-large damage and they can do some serious damage to your Necrosphinxes, which is very unfortunate. Also sending Cetra in against these Demogryph Knights just to give me a bit more support. Now, the Kemrian War Sphinx here is taking a lot of damage from Stir River Patrol, which of course has fire damage, which is super good against our undead warriors here, so that's very unfortunate for him. But these 2 guys charging in, along with the Necrotect here, so that they can get those bonuses from him and do as much damage as possible. The Sepulchral Stalkers still kind of stood around because I'm not good at micro, and everything else just moving up very, very casually. Starting to target some of the Ushabti here. We're just going to aim for the key targets, so the great swords and stuff, put them on guard mode, so if the enemy runs away, then they don't start to follow. As you can see, their General of the Empire comes down, charges my Ushabti. Fortunately for me, I have a bunch of Tomb Guard of Halberds and Cetra right there, so that guy, yeah, he's not going to do too hot. Hero Titan also getting into range. I should have used the spells a little bit more, but while it was going on, I kind of forgot about the micro, as I do. Sepulchral Stalkers now moving in against these, these Huntsmen here, so they're going to do some nice shots, and also going towards these Demogryph Knights with Halberds, so of course they have anti-large, but so these guys, so it's a pretty reasonable duel, I'd say. Here we are. Tomb Guard also moving up, going to help out in this duel here against the Demogryph Knights, because the Necrosphinx, they are really good, but Demogryph Knights, they're slightly better. Ushabti all targeting key targets here, focusing down that cavalry, because the Empire Cavalry is really good. The enemy general, he is kind of stuck in there with Cetra and these Tomb Guards with Halberds, so he's of course not really going to get much done. Sepulchral Stalkers in a nice little duel there against the Demogryph Knights with Halberds, doing some fantastic damage to them. It's pretty even battle, but we're still doing some fabulous damage. The other Sepulchral Stalkers trying to get round into the enemy artillery, getting a little bit charged by those Demogryph Knights, but fortunately for us, the other Sepulchral Stalkers can turn around and help out there. The Casket of Souls just firing into this clump. The good thing about having this many monsters is that even if you hit them with artillery, you know, they're massive monsters. You're not going to get rid of the unit, is what I'm trying to say. If you hit some infantry, you're going to get rid of a couple of models, and that's going to bring down your damage. But when it's monsters, you can kind of afford to do it. Fortunately, the Necrotect here, he's a little bit in too deep. I should have really kept him out on the side and not let him get isolated in all those greatswords. So he is unfortunately going to perish in this battle here. Units of Tomb Guard of Halberds has moved up against these greatswords. They do kind of need help going against stuff that's ridiculously elite, so unfortunately they are crumbling a little bit there. These Tomb Guard here, I'm really bad at micro, so those guys kind of stood around, and these guys, they look like they're just running into a wall as well. As I said, not good at micro. But fortunately for us, the Lord, Cetra, and the Necrosphinx are kind of moving around here towards this fight, so we're going to be able to take out two birds with one stone there, with the Necrosphinx and Cetra going against the Lord and a bunch of enemy cav. These White Wolf Huntsmen, for some reason, moving around. I think they're trying to get my Necrosphinx in the back, but our Tomb Guard should be able to shut that shit down immediately. The Tomb Guard of Halberds also moving up here. These units are going to break, but that Luminarch of Hysh is also breaking, and these guys are going to get in there and help out this melee even more. Finally getting our Sepulchral Stalkers into the enemy artillery there, which is fantastic. They're going to completely tear that up. There's nothing that the enemy can do to really stop that. The other Sepulchral Stalkers, they've taken quite a lot of damage and they are now crumbling, but going into these Huntsmen, so that should be a pretty easy duel there. We've got our second tier of the Realm of Souls, so a load of replenishment, which is going to really help us out. Ushabti and the Bone Giants and the Casket of Souls still just firing into these enemies, completely destroying them. That fantastic shot by the Bone Giant there, that is just cementing that Temple of Luminarch is never coming back. Cetra and the Necrosphinx still dueling against these Demogryph Knights with Halberds. A fantastic duel there. Cetra, I know he's large and these guys are anti-large, but Cetra is just an absolute monster on that chariot. It is very fun to get him on the Khemerian War Sphinx, but goddamn, when he gets on that Chariot of Souls, it's pretty ridiculous. And there we go, the enemy is suffering from army losses. The only units left is these great swords here that have Unbreakable, the Caribou great swords, so we're just going to basically target everything on them, and that'll be our victory. So as we can see, the constructs, of course, did the majority of the killings. The Khemerian War Sphinx is getting about 100 kills each. The Necrosphinxes also doing some fantastic work. Of course, they're going against Cav, which has a slightly smaller unit size, so they don't get as many kills as the War Sphinxes. Casket of Souls, each with about 100 each. That's fantastic. The Ushabti with great bows, again, doing some great damage. The Necrosphinx did some great kills before he went out. Of course, melee infantry doesn't do too much because, as I said, they need help. They're not generally the units that are getting the kills. They're just kind of there to, bog the enemy down and get some good work done. Cetra didn't get as many kills as he could, but that is mainly because he was dueling the Lord and helping out with the Cav. But that's just fine. The Hero Titan, again, I didn't use him as well as I could, but he still got a few kills. And the Sepulchral Stalkers, of course, the Eyes of the Desert, they did fantastic work with 50 kills there. Back to you, Miles. Thanks for that, Miles. That concludes this section of the guide on Tomb King armies. Next time we'll cover the Lords and Heroes and what they can do for you both in campaign and on the battlefield. Thanks for watching this section of the guide. If you want to check out the other parts, there's a link in the card and in the description for a playlist to the series. Don't forget to vote on the poll for the next race you want me to make a guide for, which is linked in the description and the comments. If you enjoyed this video at any point, then please consider leaving a like, as it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more of this type of video, maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.